again with the Looking Glass Forum. We're maintaining our national heritage in an age of globalist tyranny, defending natural immunity and the natural man in an age of eugenics and transhumanism, and we're remembering the Sabbath of the Lord in an age of Romanism and papal despotism. Welcome back to Looking Glass Forum. Here we are, we're doing another episode, and on this episode I just wanted to kind of get out the whole discussion, which is really like culturally taboo, relating to 9/11. And it's a tough talk because this is where the people stopped thinking, and there was a lot of powerful psychological operations that went along with 9/11. I think that with the media too, they made it like really difficult and impossible to question the narrative. Right?
Yeah, it's the fear factor. We've been going through it with COVID, and I remember very vividly how I felt after 9/11. I believed the story for a year. I believed the official narrative. My ex-wife didn't, and I thought she was crazy. And that's how people look at people who question the official narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't know what to think. You know, what hits me now is that for a strike, there was a lot of cameras trained on the situation. You know, so it reminds me of the JFK assassination when somebody, you know, it was really expensive and rare to have like an 8mm like portable camera at that time, like a portable 8mm camera in 1963. It's crazy to have one right there at that very moment when the guy is going to drive up and get shot, you know. So, but they did. Right. They filmed it, which is like, you know, I mean, maybe somebody would film him go by, but I mean, just to be there with that incredibly hard to get technology and just be right there and filming it reminds me that you know, that it was really well like documented, like what, you know. So a lot of people didn't go to work that day. A lot of strange stock transactions occur. Like the whole incident is really just fraught with issues, you know, and it's all swept under the rug, you know.
Yeah, I was working at a mall store. We were building a mall store, and somebody had a TV, and they brought it out right outside the store I was working at, and we were all pretty much just stopped working and was just dumbfounded watching the television. And then they said they wanted us to go home, so they cleared the mall out around noon, and everybody had to leave the mall. And I got home, and shortly after that, Building 7 fell into itself, and that was filmed live. That's the thing. I don't understand why. I think a plane was supposed to hit Building 7. Mm-hmm. Because it was ready to go. I mean, it was
right
with whatever they use, nanothermite and dynamite or whatever.
And as they said, somebody said live on air, there was a lot of confusion, but they said, let's pull it. And I'll have to go back and look at all the records. And if you look now with Google and YouTube, it's really, really difficult to go back and piece together some of the records. You can still find some of the videos, but a lot of the information it's slowly just disappearing. And when it's gone and you can't see it, you don't know that you're missing it, you know. And
yeah, there used to be a plethora of videos on it. Now they're few and far between on YouTube.
Yeah,
and if I go look up to get one on Building 7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I go look up anything on it now, like the couple that I just checked, all have like right in the opening paragraphs of their little websites that they have discussing. There's one that's called the Institute of Structural Design Qualifications or something crazy like that. And then I go down in the very first paragraph, it says, although we hold to the idea that there's a flat Earth and we don't believe in a global Earth anymore, so it immediately becomes this kind of like disinformation garbage, you know. And so then right after that, which is irrelevant regarding a flat Earth, they go down and start discussing, you know, World Trade Center 7. So you immediately have to just kind of be insane to believe in the World Trade Center issues, right? That's what the website does. It sits there and it just causes disinformation because, you know what I mean? If you want to go and explore World Trade Center 7 issues, then you have to like couple yourself with flat Earth things, you know? That's kind of what I'm seeing when I look now. If you look a little bit closer into those websites, you know,
I would like
it's kind of crazy. Yeah,
I would like to do a study on the flat Earth, how that came about, and how so many people I'm friends with on Facebook believe it. They still believe it. They'll end their conversation with, well, good night from the flat Earth.
I mean, I don't know how serious people got convinced. Like, did I miss the seminar where everyone showed up and got convinced, and I just missed it? Like, I don't know what happened there. When did we switch to a flat Earth?
I watched some of their videos, and they're just ridiculous.
Right.
They all go to Antarctica, and they all do something with the sun in Antarctica, the way it moves. It's impossible that it's a global Earth.
No. They want to move from heliocentricity, which is that the center of the solar system is our star, or the sun, and for us, it's fixed. And we move around it, and they want to move to geocentricity, which is that the Earth is fixed, and somehow the star is moving around the Earth. And that's flat Earth. I mean, you have to be totally bonkers. And the flat Earth society business, I always thought that was just gaslighting. I thought it was just maybe we're getting to a point now in like the fulcrum and the culmination of our education of human intelligence, like that quotient is at a point now where maybe they can convince everyone's so dumbed down that maybe this will work. Maybe they'll be able to flat Earth everyone, and everyone will stop trying to explore. They'll just kind of go back to serfdom because they're back to flat Earth. We're back to 15 or something. We're back to Galileo all of a sudden. Well, wasn't the Vatican the ultimate flat earther? Am I missing something? I'm trying to remember.
I don't know. I think at one time they were.
Well, they wanted to. Galileo came up with the Copernicus models, and he showed that these objects in the sky are moving around us, and he was able to prove that we have a spherical Earth. And then they tried to kill him. They made him recant and burn his books
and put him on house arrest for the rest of his life.
I think if he would have went out and spoke truthfully about it, I think they probably would have burned him at the stake. So yeah, they were determined that the Earth was flat, and then anyone who said otherwise, it was heresy. So
well, the church can't be wrong, right?
Yeah, can't be.
That's the.
Did you say they were wrong? If you said they were wrong, don't say that, because then you're in trouble. That's a heresy.
Nowhere in the Bible does it say there's a flat Earth.
Right.
They talk about the different directions, but they don't say a flat Earth in the Bible, and they never say that the Earth is the center of the universe. It's not spoken of in the Bible.
Right. It's obviously not. Yeah.
That's Catholic dogma, and they knew it. They knew it. Several hundred years BC that the Earth was round. They even had the circumference down.
I think the Greeks really nailed that. Yeah.
And then the pyramids all point. You can add it up, and then there's so many formulas you can do with the pyramids, but they add up to a circular Earth. Mm-hmm. A global Earth. That's just one of those things, I guess.
Yeah, it's really distressing.
I don't hear too much more about it anymore, but.
I think it is distressing because I think we were clear about the nature of the Earth then. If you look in the sky and you look at all the things you can observe, the moon, the sun, and when you can look closer at the planets, they're all spheres. So why would it change here?
Spheres and we get a disk.
Right.
We got jabbed.
Totally. Yeah. And so. It's strange. I think that the Dark Ages, we lost all the ability to read and write and transfer information generationally. And when you have just a clique of guys up in the Vatican who speak Latin, or who hold all their teachings in Latin, then the information isn't pushed out. And so you had the Dark Ages, and people forgot that the Earth was a sphere. They began to believe it was flat. I think that they knew that Galileo was right, but they couldn't. They couldn't publicly say the church was wrong. There had to be maybe a graduation period where or maybe they just wanted the mass of people to just be ignorant and not know what Galileo was learning. Which is what the Greeks knew centuries before. So even coming to America was putting faith in a global Earth. So the discovery of America by the Pilgrims, if you will. And these are pilgrims who are coming to the New World for religious freedom because they just experienced, 6 centuries of Inquisition. And people probably couldn't count up how many centuries it was at the time. They just knew that for as long as they could ever remember, the Dark Ages of Europe were just murdering them for the Waldensians or the Albigensians or the Huguenots.
Waldensians, and Albigensians.
The Jansenists.
Crusades of the Albigensians.
Yeah.
But they were also Gnostics or Cathars.
Right, but at the same time, I don't fault them for not having total, complete knowledge, but they wanted to hold true to their beliefs, and that's not a reason to kill them. It's not a reason to kill Muslims. It's not a reason to kill anybody. So I still hold the papacy at fault, even if they were they had a really good propaganda, and they really put into the history that they were cleansing the world of these dirty Gnostic, but at the same time, the church itself is based on Gnosticism. So, they just really wanted to have, the papacy at the time wanted to have the control and the primacy of the bishop of the world. So he couldn't have any other bishops out there. He couldn't have anybody in Avignon being anti-popes here and anti-popes there. So it was the rise of the papacy to the supremacy of world dominion, not just spiritually in church, but also in politics throughout the world as a civil power and a king in the law. So he could have an army. He could have and that's kind of what we're seeing again today is that rise again.
Well, I guess now that they're sending Captain Kirk up into space, what can you imagine if when William Shatner landed, if he got out of the capsule and said, "My God, Bones, the Earth is flat."
Right. No, I think if you go up high enough, and surely the people who fly around the world know it, but it's really for the people who've never traveled out of their county and they're on their computer too much. They can really be convinced of this, this flat Earth thing, and so it's mind numbing, and I'm not really sure what they gain. Why is it such a clutch? Why is it so crucial? Why is it the linchpin of their belief system? Who cares? But they seem to care so much that, and it really goes to the heart of globalism, because now globalism is a lie. So if you're trying to fight the globalists, the internationalists, but they've convinced you. Hey, I'm recording.
Yeah.
But they've convinced you. No, sorry. But they've convinced you that you're on a flat Earth, and I guess you lost, right? You lost the struggle because they have their shipping containers going all around the world.
Well, I definitely think it's a psyop of some kind. I bet it can be traced back to. Well, it probably can't be traced back, but it was a psyop. Too many people knew about it, or they were all set up with all these seminars, and
right.
From
who? To what end? Yeah.
And you was on YouTube. I'd hate it. I'd see something interesting, a YouTube video about space, and it wouldn't say anything about flat Earth. It would say space, blah blah, stars and beyond. I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And you click on it, and for the first 5 minutes, it would be legitimate stuff.
Right, interesting.
And then it would go right into the flat Earth thing.
Right. And it totally just, and they mix it in with other relevant issues, like I said, with the 9/11 deal, so that if you want to go look into issues about the building a 7 situation, then all of a sudden you have to read a couple paragraphs about the flat Earth, and it ruins and it poisons the well of what you're trying to accomplish, which is get to the truth. So yeah, I think we're in an age. I think that they are good at creating this kind of scientism, where people have this kind of pseudo information and they like to, carry on with it. But I think that we're trying to penetrate through that here because 9/11 was a way to go to war and to start the Crusade wars again with Islam, right? So we're back to that kind of.
Well, it really is. If you read even a paragraph it's in one paragraph of the Wolfowitz Doctrine. Well, they're talking about world dominance and dominance in Mideast and invading the Mideast, and Wolfowitz straight up says at this time we're unable to do so. We need a catastrophe, something worse than Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And that was written in, I think, 98. And, I mean, they did what they said.
Right. Yeah, you have Donald Rumsfeld in there, and then you have Dick Cheney, so that you know.
Dick Cheney had taken control of NORAD about 9 months before 9/11. He was in charge of NORAD, which was unprecedented. And then I sent you an article on Marvin Bush. He was on the board of directors for security of the Twin Towers. You can piece it together all the way down to a conspiracy.
Right.
And by conspiracy, I mean that we don't believe the official story. That's what I define conspiracy.
Yeah, they had the gentleman, the rich individual Silverstein, come in, and he basically bought the Twin Towers or what have you right there, and then he apparently he had the insurance claim on the whole thing, and I guess he's now responsible for building the new tower, the new One World Trade Center that they have now. I think that so I think that in my mind, in many ways, like we said before, it was a way to deal with the insurance. It's very expensive
there were just parts of it.
Right.
That's how evil works. There's an economy to evil. They don't want to just do one thing. They want to get several things accomplished.
Right.
Which they did. I was going to tell you something. Oh, Silverstein.
Right.
He got $4 billion for the World Trade Centers.
Mm-hmm.
And he sued to try to get $8 billion because he said there were 2 terrorist attacks.
Right. Because
2 planes hit it. But
right.
He didn't get it.
But that's what you do when you're when you're a big league billionaire financier. Then you want it all, But listen, let's take a quick break because we're going to just play the clip. We have an audio clip for the episode, and it's a brief discussion with a senator from Australia who's the government official in Australia. They call him the Ron Paul of Australia, I guess is his pseudonym there that he gets. But I want to just take a few minutes and run that clip, and then we'll be right back.
Okay, I'll tell you later.
So just to break it down, we're just going to play a little clip here from Geopolitics and Empire, and it's Senator Malcolm Roberts, and they're discussing the issues with coronavirus, climate change, and the Party of Davos, China, and the Great Reset. And really, they're going to, in this process of talking about the elites and the power structure, the global apparatus that's being established, they are going to have to touch on 9/11 and the issues with that. And that's really what we're honing in on this episode. I'll add it in the show notes, so please pay attention and take a look. But we're really trying to, the serious people now can no longer remain clammed up in cowardice and in silence. So we have to discuss this issue at 9/11. So let's do it.
It was fabricated. So we see this as a ruse. You've mentioned that in 1976 that the call was for catastrophic global freezing due to hydrocarbon fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. Now we see global warming. But now, actually, we saw global warming. Now we see climate change due to hydrocarbon fuels. These people are just fabricating whatever they want to get control of hydrocarbon fuels, because whoever controls our energy controls what we do. Now, it goes back, so it's a complete fabrication. There is no evidence anywhere in the world. I've held NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies accountable. I've held our CSIRO accountable, Commonwealth Scientific Industry and Research Organisation, which provides the government with this data. Now, that minister that I told you about a minute ago, Greg Hunt, who was responsible for the environment and putting in some of these policies that protected these people who are adjusting the data and called upon the government to do something about climate based upon the CSIRO, that same man is now our health minister, putting in place a lot of these pandemic routines. We also see that I've held for the last 12 years members of parliament, media, academics, government agencies accountable for their claims about climate. Not one of them has been able to provide me with the empirical scientific evidence proving that carbon dioxide from human activity affects climate. No one anywhere in the world, Herboye, has been able to quantify the specific effect of carbon dioxide from humans on climate, not even on temperature. So without that fundamental thing, quantifying the effect, you cannot make a policy. Without that, you cannot set targets. You cannot assess progress towards achieving those targets. You cannot do a cost-benefit analysis. No one has got it anywhere. The leader of the government in the Senate, Matthias Cormann, formerly leader, he left and became head of the OECD, where he's putting in place a lot of these globalist agenda. I asked him a number of times in the Senate for his empirical evidence proving that carbon dioxide from human activity affects climate needs to be cut. Never once did he provide it. He always resorted ultimately to saying, we have to fulfill our global responsibility, our global duty. This is crap, Ogoye. It is absolute crap. It's run by a few companies, leaders, the globalists, the elites, to further their own nest to get control. And I want to mention Maurice Strong. You've probably heard of him.
Yeah.
A criminal. Left the United States, a Canadian, left the United States, where he was wanted for investigation into criminal activities by the American police, and resided in China in exile, voluntary exile. China is the main beneficiary of these policies. And Maurice Strong hid there. Maurice Strong, he died in 2015, was an exceptionally talented man, very, very gifted at networking, at manipulating people. He's just one of these people who could do it. Now, he created the whole of this global warming scam, that became climate change scam, back in the 1970s. He manipulated and formed the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the so-called scientists, that is a political organization, has never produced the science that proves that we need to cut carbon dioxide. And he has manipulated this throughout, and he's done it by exerting control on the grassroots movements, people like Greenpeace, people like World Wildlife Fund, people like the other conservation organizations in this country that are pushing this crap. And they're just lies. We also have Prince Philip saying that he would like to come back as a virus and wipe out humans. I mean, what kind of person is this? I have a lot of respect for the Queen. But look at Prince Charles saying much the same kind of thing. Absolute insanity. And then we have the ultimate betrayal. When they can't produce the evidence, they trot out an awkward 16-year-old who's not very comfortable socially, and put her on the stage and say, we'll do whatever Greta Thunberg says. They parade her as the evidence. That is the complete logical betrayal of science. They're putting up an awkward and unsociable 16-year-old who's now an 18-year-old and portraying her as the reason we should do this. This is absolute crap. It's blatant lies, blatant manipulation. They want in control, I'll say it again, they want in control of our energy, control of our industry, control of our resources, control of our property. I didn't mention that last time, but they're controlling our property rights. They're wanting control of water. These are fundamental, basic things about human existence. You control these and you control everything that humans do. They're using what they call the United Nations sustainability, which is, by definition, reliant upon subsidies, which makes it unsustainable. Remove the subsidies and it's not sustainable. But with sustainability, they want to regulate everything we do, how we live, what we do. The second pillar of this United Nations control effort is biodiversity. We've got to protect that fungus over there, those critters over there, the plants over there. We've got to tough you off your property because you're less important than the fungus, the bugs, and the critters and the plants. That's rubbish. And then the third thing they want to do is to impose a globalist socialist governance, unelected. And that's what Maurice Strong himself said many times, that's his two aims, to deindustrialize Western civilization and to put in place an unelected socialist global governance. You don't have to rely upon just Maurice Strong's words, because many senior people in the United Nations, the bureaucrats, Christina Figueres, for example, in charge of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which oversees the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, she herself has said it's to bring in a new world economic order. The Lima Declaration in 1975 was passed by a Labour Prime Minister in this country. The following year was ratified by the Liberal Nationalist Prime Minister, and that is, both sides have passed that. That is about transferring wealth, transferring knowledge, transferring material, transferring manufacturing from our country to places like China. This has been orchestrated, it's been deliberate. They've admitted that with their own statements, their own policies. And our dopey government in this country dishonestly is incorporating those policies into smashing our country, and the people are falling for it. So more and more people are waking up, though, around the world. So to answer your question, will it happen? It depends on the people. Liberty begins with you.
You mentioned Prince Charles, and I believe it was just this weekend he brazenly gave quite a startling speech where he called for a global military-style operation that would cost trillions of dollars to carry out basically what you described. So they're openly telling us to our faces, and that's frightening. And you mentioned China as well, which was kind of the last theme I wanted to touch on. We recently had this new security pact between Australia, UK, and the US form AUKUS, or however you want to pronounce it. This is a sign that tensions are escalating between the West and Beijing, and Australia. You guys are out stuck, between the U.S. and China, I've read analysis of the formation of this pact is one step towards war, and even nuclear war. They're talking about nuclear submarines, and then Australia would become a jumping off point for an offensive on China, and as well as it would become a prime target for China. So what can you tell us about the current East-West tensions, as well as Australia's role in this new Cold War with China?
Well, you opened up with a comment about Ron Paul. Ron Paul is self-taught. He's a doctor, but he's self-taught on economics, and very, very capable on economics and finance matters. He's gone right into the financial system in the United States and globally. He wrote a book called End the Fed, and I've thoroughly recommended it to people. It's a book I like me. It's short, it's simple, and it's easy to read, but it's packed with information and very well written. He said that since 1913 and the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank, the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank, it neither has reserves nor is it federal. It's not a government entity at all. It is privately owned, privately controlled. We know that. Many more Americans are waking up to that fact. But he said that since 1913 and the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank, every major war, every major recession is directly attributable to the Federal Reserve Bank and its policies. Australia blindly follows the United States into war. When we had 9/11, and I won't discuss that in any detail because it's not something that I've researched deeply. I do have two questions about 9/11 though. How did Building 7 collapse? It was razed to the ground, and yet it's never been discussed. No one's asked that question. And why hasn't there been a formal investigation into 9/11? George Bush didn't have a formal investigation. His successor from the opposition didn't have any formal investigation. We don't know what happened. So there are two serious questions that haven't been answered. But Ron, when I raised 9/11 because our Prime Minister, John Howard at the time, was in America when it happened. When he came back, this is not me telling you this, these are the words of Alexander Downer, who was the Foreign Affairs Minister for Foreign Affairs at the time, the Foreign Secretary, if you like. When he retired a few years later, Hervoyer, he said that John Howard came back from America, marched into cabinet, and said, "We're off to Iraq." Just like that. That bypasses the checks and balances that are in place before we commit our men and young men and women to foreign military action. Back, if you remember the previous Gulf War, we had weapons of mass destruction. We had Colin Powell come out. I believe he was lied to. He came out later and said, "We haven't got the evidence." We had the President of America come out and say, "We don't have the evidence." We had the Prime Minister of Australia who told us, John Howard, that we went into that war, in the Gulf War, because of weapons of mass destruction, admit that there were no weapons of mass destruction. We had people all over the military complexes and the governments of many Western countries, including Britain, said, no, there are no weapons of mass destruction. But they all relied upon that to start with. The reason I'm saying this, Hervoyer, is I question whether there really is any grounds for war. I question whose narrative we believe. Carbon dioxide, you're exhaling it right now. Everyone watching this is exhaling it. We inhale it in a concentration in the air of 0.04%. Around 4/100th of 1%. It's a trace gas because it is scientifically classified a trace gas. We exhale it at 100 times that level, 4%. So by definition of these lunatics running this show, you're a pollutant. You're a polluter. I'm a polluter. This is complete crap. Carbon dioxide is essential for all life on this planet. But they're telling us that's now a pollutant. It is not toxic. It is invisible. It is colorless. It is odorless. It's not radioactive. It doesn't give off light. It doesn't give off any noise. It doesn't pollute us. It doesn't destroy the soil. It enhances the soil. It's essential for all life on this planet, but they're telling us it's a pollutant. Now they're telling us that this virus is a pandemic, when clearly it's not. And they're using these things to put in place controls. It's the same with many of the things we're being told. They're blatant lies. And they're meant to coerce us, suppress us, and keep us under control and not question. Well, with people like me and with people like you and with an increasing number around the world, we're saying, hang on, this doesn't make sense. It stimulates questions. And what I say to people is, we have to remember who controls the vote. We vote. We control who becomes government. Use your vote wisely. If you're not happy with the candidates, become one. Stand up.
So you can see that this is a senator from Australia. He's obviously dealing with a huge catastrophe in their country. I think that they were terribly foolish when they gave up their guns. So they have no recourse and no defense against an invading army or a massive crime wave or international conspirators who are there to subvert your government and basically bring you down. And you're basically under control of the security state. And as much as the security state now controls you and tells you what to do and what medicine you're going to take, and you have no really ability to defend your individual sovereignty. So you can see that they cover the gamut of issues there. You can see that the problem of international globalism and the agenda, it does go back to 9/11. It goes back with that point in history when people decided that they were going to close their eyes and no longer be able to handle the truth or be able to look at it, and powerful media, propaganda, powerful government institutions. I remember George Bush getting up there and saying that they would not tolerate conspiracy theories, and so they would have no one question the official narrative, basically. And you can see that with that program. And we're going to go into it more. We're going to have to take a look at more of the different clues and the different evidence and different articles regarding 9/11. And we have to take a close look at Building 7. Building 7 was not struck by any plane, and it was not damaged in any serious way, but it was down there close to the aftermath. And it was destroyed and brought down by demolition, by construction grade demolition, where they brought it down, much like the larger World Trade Center buildings that were hit by planes. They were brought down with precision under construction explosions. So we'll show you that video. We have also to introduce the articles. Hollywood is full of the power player and the elite, and they're really into the occult. The word Hollywood, the wood, holly, is the kind of wood that you need to make a magical wand, according to witchcraft and according to occult science. If you want to have a practical magic wand, you have to use Hollywood. And so it's the magic, and it's ultimately the Freemasonry and the powerful delusion of Hollywood that consumes the American mind. And we have to look at the symbolism. We have to look at the movie Back to the Future. And if you look at Back to the Future carefully, you can see that they had a lot of the information and a lot of the plan and the blueprint for 9/11 was laid out. And of course, you'll have to, at this point, be questioning and be skeptical about what we're talking about here, but we'll introduce the video clip and the information, and there is a gentleman who will break down all the occult symbolism of Back to the Future and show you how they imprinted the plan for 9/11, the World Trade Centers, and that destruction. They had it planned for many, many years in advance, and it becomes kind of obvious. So at this point, we're going to introduce a little clip here by Robert Sullivan IV, and he's a well-known, he's an individual who's we've used to come and use his audio clips and in his discussions on our show before. And in this case, we're going to have him introduce the idea of the occult symbolism, the cinematography and symbolism of Hollywood.
You have another book out on cinema symbolism.
Correct. This is the third edition, or the third volume of Cinema Symbolism, Volume 3, Cinema Symbolism 3. Came out last May, or I think the print edition came out in March and the ebook came out in May. And this is the latest of the movie books.
Okay. And we've also had you on for the Royal Arch of Enoch. And you have a fiction book out called The Pact with the Devil?
Correct. I think I've been on the show maybe 2 or 3 other times. I lose track of them over the years.
Yeah, I think
I did the Royal Arch of Enoch, and I think one or two of the movie books for one of those, and then there is a work of fiction out called A Pact with the Devil, and this is Cinema Symbolism 3.
All right. Well, let's get into some of the stuff in this book. One of the things you cover is 9/11 with life imitating art.
Yes, correct. This is something that's interesting that I actually stumbled upon quite accidentally, and I had no idea about any of this. And I was researching 9/11, and whether you're a conspiracy person or not, I did find this interesting. I'm not saying this is what happened, but it is worth putting out there because it is interesting. Was the one thing that with 9/11, and this focuses on the Twin Tower buildings and Building 7, was when they collapsed, they come down in free fall, and many speculate that there was thermite charges that helped bring the buildings down.
Right.
Planes actually hit them, but the buildings come down on their own footprints, and this kind of defies physics. And many have speculated that if that was the case, there would have been explosive planted in the building. So obviously, that question or that hypothesis begs the next question is, well, let's assume for a minute that there were explosives in the building, thermite charges, whatever. How did they get there? And sure enough, there was a massive renovation that occurred in the Twin Towers between January of 2001 and September of 2001. And the company that carried out this renovation, this refurbishing to the elevators, the escalators, was a company called Ace Elevator Company. And what's interesting is that name doesn't appear anywhere in the 9/11 Commission. And you would have thought, logic dictates that if you're having, especially buildings of that magnitude, a massive overhaul, repair work done, Otis Elevator would be who you call. They're the oldest elevator company in the country. They're the ones who install everything. But this little dinky company called Ace Elevator was called. And I hypothesize in the book, and that as a word I use that I want to stress, I don't state it, I hypothesize that if these guys were government spooks or something, they obviously took the name Ace Elevator from a movie. And the movie I'm referring to is a 1985 film called Spies Like Us, where the government wetworks company, the dummy company, was called Ace Tomato Company. It stood out to me like a sore thumb. And I just found that very fascinating that, it could be a case of life imitating art where this company taken for this seemingly bogus elevator company was actually lifted from a movie. And this is something I talk about in the book, how influential Hollywood is. I've talked about, on this show and other shows about archetypes and things like that, and how they permeate Hollywood and, permeate cinema. Hollywood also invents archetypes. For instance, ask any adult or man, woman, and child to speak like a vampire, and what are they going to do? They're going to try to imitate Bela Lugosi's Hungarian accent. So it just speaks to something like that, to the power that Hollywood wields. It's an interesting hypothesis, but something I did discover, and you can look at it disturbingly, but it's there, and I don't have an answer for it. But like I said, it could be a case of life imitating art.
And you also talk about 9/11 imaging in films like Vanilla Sky, The Matrix, Fight Club, things like that.
Absolutely, and this is a really interesting talking point because you do have, and I do believe some people out there think that this is planned. I don't think it is. I think this has some. I think you're dealing with something coming out of the world of the supernatural. You have these slate of movies prior to 9/11. Before 9/11, leading right up to it. You can document. It's almost like a countdown of films such as Fight Club, which I think was 99, The Matrix, which I think was 98, Vanilla Sky, which was 01, but it was filmed prior to 9/11. Donnie Darko. I mean, even a film like The Patriot with Mel Gibson, all have this 9/11 imagery in it. I mean, some of it's quite astounding. It feels like a countdown. For instance, the movie Fight Club was released on September 21st, 1999. I mean, it's almost the date, off by 10 days. And of course, you have at the end of the movie the buildings collapsing. You have Tyler Durden, that's Brad Pitt, referring to the site as Ground Zero. You have the destruction by the space monkeys of the sphere, the globe-shaped piece of artwork. This clearly represents the sphere outside the World Trade Center Plaza, which was also destroyed in 9/11 with the falling debris. That movie, like I said, is almost released 2 years to the date of 9/11, but then you go back 2 years earlier to 1997, you have September 21st, 1997, and you have the Simpsons episode called Homer Simpson versus New York City, and this is one where Bart waves the money in front of the magazine that says 9/11, and the 11's made by the World Trade Center. So, I mean, you have this really bizarre form of synchronicity going on. It's almost like a countdown. And then you have this slate of Gnostic films coming out at the turn of the millennium, and it's all the ones we talk about. The Matrix, Fight Club, Donnie Darko, and they all feature this 9/11 imagery. And it begs the question of why. And I think it's supernatural. I think it's something coming out of the collective unconscious. I don't see, I mean, it could happen that you had a bunch of studio execs sitting around saying, hey, let's plan out a bunch of Gnostic films coming out right before the turn of the millennium. I think it's much more on a subconscious, supernatural level, me personally, and I think that makes it much more interesting. And you definitely have it. And it's all these movies are dealing with enlightenment, knowing thyself, coming to understand that reality may not be what it seems to be. Whether this has to do with the change of the millennium, the end of the age of Pisces, the start of Aquarius, this could all factor into this. But that type of symbolism placed in film, to me, doesn't see it's intentional, but it seems intentional coming from the world of the supernatural.
I feel like 9/11 was something that made a big imprint on us, and that type of imprint moves backwards in time as well as it does forwards in time, and so maybe they were just picking up on that without realizing that they were picking up on it. I mean, you had I think there was a rap band who had an album cover of a plane flying toward the Twin Towers.
You could go back in time with a lot of this stuff. I mean, the farther away you get from it, the more suspect it becomes, of course. But I mean, the stuff leading up to it me is much more interesting. But I mean, you can go back in time to earlier that year. I believe it was in 2001. I may have been 2000. I'm pretty sure it was 2001 where you had the X-Files spin-off episode, The Lone Gunman, where the plot of the pilot episode actually dealt with terrorists hijacking aircraft, was a false flag and flying them into the World Trade Center.
Really?
I mean, you go back. You go back in time. I mean, look at the movie from the early '80s, Escape from New York, John Carpenter, where terrorists hijacked Air Force One and crashed it into Lower Manhattan. I mean, that's 20 years earlier.
That's a little less specific, though.
Oh, exactly. No, I agree. I totally agree. You can find this stuff going back earlier on. To me, the more interesting aspect is the closer you get to the event is when it becomes much more pronounced.
Oh, yeah,
much more visible.
Well, I think if information is moving backwards in time, you're going to have exactly that happen. Because that rap album, I think, came out in like 99 or 2000. I know Dream Theater, I want to say they put their album out right around 9/11, and it had a cityscape of New York City on fire. And they put it out, and then that happened, and they either canceled it or they just stopped selling that version, and then just put one out with just the New York City landscape.
Right. I mean, the one that's really astounding is the Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise, which was shot post 9/11. It was in pre-production. It was in post-production when 9/11 hit. And the movie, I think, was released in December. It was. I believe it was released in December of 2001. I mean, the end of that movie is very poignant, where Tom Cruise ascends this giant, super high skyscraper in New York City that actually overlooks the Twin Towers. And in order to come to consciousness and in order to come to self-realization, he has to jump off the building. I mean, you see him leap off, falling down, right, in the backdrop of the World Trade Center. It brings to mind immediately, the people jumping off that building. And the just real quick, the director was pressured to remove that, and he didn't, and I think he was smart not to.
Huh. And I remember there was something weird with the Matrix. What was the 9/11 date was in there somewhere, wasn't it?
Yeah, and actually the whole date appears. It's Neo's passport. It expires on 9/11/01 to the date. And there's a couple. There's another reason that ties into that, and it deals with his birthday also, which has a state date also that has to do with the suppression by Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York, with regarding a prison riot. And of course, Neo is the exact opposite. He will free the prisoners from the prison.
Right.
So Neo's birthday also has symbolic meaning. But yeah, I mean, in the Matrix, the date of 9/11/2001 is right there, and you got to pause it, and I think it's upside down, but it is readable, and it appears in the scene where he's being interrogated at the beginning by Smith, is where it turns up, and yeah, I mean, you have that coupled with all these other things. To me, just doing this for the last 20 years or whatever, researching the Royal Arch and then doing all the movie stuff, I'm at the point now where this to me strikes me as more supernatural than planned.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm pretty.
I think it makes it much more interesting. Go ahead.
I think you could probably do an entire book just on The Simpsons.
Yeah, you probably could. I mean, you scratch the surface with some of this stuff. I mean, some of it is really uncanny. One of the things I talk about in the book, and I'm not being political here, but is Donald Trump. I mean, there's the movie The Gremlins 2, where there's a Donald Trump, I think it came out in 1991, or 92 maybe. There's a Donald Trump analog in that movie called Daniel Clamp, played by John Glover. And there's a scene where he comes out of a skyscraper and he's interviewed by the media, and they shove 2 microphones in his face, and the numbers on the microphones are 11 and 9. And this again, of course, November 9th, the date he became president. And then this reoccurs a few years later, where he does a sort of mattress ad. I believe it's in 2011, I want to say, maybe 09. And I won't get into much, but it has to do with counting sheep. And to make a long story short, the sheep wind up guarding his hotel room, and they're out in front of rooms 9/11 or 11/9, and again, November 9th. And then you have, with Trump, you have the movie, the Lego movie, which also, you have a guy named Business who becomes president Business, and his sole modus operandi is to build walls around the different Lego worlds. He refers to his detractors as snowflakes. I mean, it's very prophetic, and it's very strange to say the least. And like I said, you just begin to wonder. You reach a point where you're just saying to yourself, this is more supernatural than it seems. It seems beyond the realm of human possibility.
Well, there's also the Simpsons episode where Trump is president, and it literally occurred in real life, that exact scene.
There's one where there's one, I think, where it's Trump. It came out. This is a mistake where it's made, but Trump was actually president at the time.
Oh, was he?
And,
okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think that one's been debunked a little bit, but I know the Simpsons have been very pathetic, but it's been on for so long, I have to get something right.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, like I said, I get into the whole idea of movies as prophecies, as vehicles of prophecy. I mean, you go back there's an episode of The Legends of Chamberlain Heights, which I think came out around 2008, 2009. I'd have to go look. That depicts Kobe Bryant dying in a helicopter crash.
Oh.
The movie The China Syndrome was released 2 weeks before 3 Mile Island. And of course, the China Syndrome is about a nuclear reactor melting down. I mean, it really becomes uncanny after a while, and you do say to yourself, at least I do, this isn't coincidence.
So we're going to introduce more with this particular author, Robert Sullivan V, and he does some other books too. He's a 32nd degree Freemason, and he does a really interesting book called The Royal Arch of Enoch. It's the 13th degree of Freemasonry, and that's really a side note. But one of the high degrees of Freemasonry is called the Knight of Malta, the Order of Malta degree, and maybe it's on the On the other side of the Scottish Rite is the York Rite, and maybe it's on the York Rite side of Freemasonry. But the point is that when you get to the high degrees of Freemasonry in the lodge, then you are introduced to the knighthood degrees. So there's the papal knights, and the Order of Malta, the sovereign military order of Malta, is a central component of our discussion, because we have to get to the nature of what is the military arm of the Vatican. Who are these high level internationalists who have an island nation, have their own passports, their own money system. They're not unlike the Vatican, and from their fortress island of Malta, they're able to. The Order of Saint John is able to. They originally were the Templar Knights, the knights who guarded Jerusalem. And later, after the Templars were destroyed, there was the Hospitaller Order of Knights, and really this is the extension of the Hospitaller Order. And the Knights of Malta have become entrenched, high-level elitists. They have a secret order that goes back some 5 centuries. And there were a lot of men who were operating on all sides in all nations. Like we said, in America, you can find Albert Pike was a high-level Knight of Malta. He was actually the one who invented, like we said repeatedly in the show, who brought to bear and organized the Scottish Rite to become a powerful secret society within the United States. He invented the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. He was a Confederate general. And he was when the Illuminati came out over time. Later on, he was one of the acolytes and the operators within this internationalist Illuminati movement. It was coming out of the aristocracy there in Europe. Other men like Cecil Rhodes is associated with this order, and we have to bring again the question of the incredible financial power and economic weight that was brought to bear in John Pierpont Morgan, and also in their banking, and also in the controlling of the massive Standard Oil fortune coming out of the Rockefeller family. In as much as that even the Standard Oil operation was connected with Saudi Arabia, so the Saudi princes, after World War I, after the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, they're going to come in and establish Standard Oil, and other Knights of Malta are going to establish enormous financial and commercial contracts and business deals with the Prince of the Prince Saud and the Saud family, so that they will be the keepers of Mecca and Medina and the Arabian Peninsula. But they're really ultimately, much like when we were looking at the Club of Rome, we had to deal with another monarch, a prince. His Royal Highness Prince bin Talil is the president of the Club of Rome. So another a man who's from a Hashemite dynasty, who ultimately is a Muslim, from a Muslim family, and he's a royal. He's from a monarchical family. So his brother is the king, and he's the prince. And ultimately, as monarchs and as princes, they're going to be associated with the Knights of Malta and with high-level internationalist elite clubs like the Club of Rome, who are ultimately controlled by, like we said, the Vatican. So you can see that on many levels, the Ottoman Empire was destroyed in World War I, but they have a new level of underlings and Muslim sycophants and acolytes who really are the do-boys that serve the papacy and serve the Knights of Malta and serve the princes. Ultimately, it was the British Empire who destroyed the Ottoman Empire and destroyed the Caliphate, and ultimately cut up the Caliphate to become Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, become the Saudi Arabia, become Iraq, Iran. So all these little nations that like in Lebanon, for instance, are all really the brainchild and the creation of the British Empire. After they defeated the Ottoman Empire, they would create these several countries like Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan, so on and so forth, and they would basically stand these countries up to become nation states that are like India, that are really just jewels and the royal crown and the royal tiara of the British Empire. So we have to understand that extension of that power structure, and we have to understand that the the Knights of Malta and their position. And when we're listening to the different media outlets, we can hear the information that we need. We can hear people discussing the topics that we need to discuss, and we can hear, for instance, we're talking about Steve Bannon and the War Room, and he likes to discuss all kinds of topics, and when you listen carefully, you can hear him discuss the things that matter. So let's go ahead and just take a little listen here.
Saying, hey, we're not going to go along with a weak Vatican and a weak network of bishops that have just kowtowing to all these woke policies. And this on the weekend where I think 9 or 10 officials in the Catholic Church, including a major cardinal, have been indicted for money laundering and fraud at the Vatican courts, right? Much less what's charges going to take place with them and Knights of Malta and all this other the same guys that cut the deal with the Chinese Communist Party, the secret deal. So I want to bring in Liz George.
So in all the relevant discussions that they're having at the War Room, they're going to, for just a brief moment, say the quiet part out loud and discuss the major financial backers, the major power elite that are controlling these different globalist organizations are the Knights of Malta. Okay, and of course, one of the steps in the grade to the ascension of their secret society is that a lot of these guys are going to enter through the Freemason clubs or what have you, and they're going to end up, as they graduate up, they're going to end up becoming tools, instruments of this apparatus. And you can't become a 32nd degree Freemason unless you pass through several orders of knighthood. So you're going to pass through the Order of the Rosy Cross, the Knights of the Royal Sun, or what have you, the Knights of the Royal Secret. And so there's all these knighthood degrees that you have to pass through in order to really get to the top, the pinnacle there within that club. And ultimately, you can see that it's a return to monarchialism and the aristocracy and the banking elite that it really has been in Europe there, that has been running the show for several centuries. So we have to address the issue of the Knights of Malta because of their influence in the background with the issues of 9/11 and with the issues moving us forward. And with for instance, the United Nations is set on a piece of property in Manhattan and New York City there that was donated by the Rockefeller family. So you can see that over time, the money, the financing, the construction, and the actual execution of the globalist agenda is in the hands of these extremely wealthy men who are Knights of Malta.
Right. The financing for ISIS was coming from us, and I'm like, that's the most patriotic thing an American can do to stop our own government's corruption, and it's documented. Like, we had the Defense Intelligence Agency's 2012 the document saying we're supporting ISIS, and people just can't. It's really hard. But this kind of segues into terrorism and all of that. Into the next question I had for you. Yes, I haven't talked about this. I haven't talked about 9/11 much at all in the podcast. There's different reasons for that, but it's been 20 years since 9/11. A few years after 9/11, Dylan Avery had created the internet blockbuster Loose Change, which I think factually demonstrates that 9/11 was an inside job, a false flag operation. As Lance DeHaven Smith, who I've interviewed, he's got the book. He calls it a SCAD, or state crime against democracy. You worked with Dylan Avery back then. He has just created a new film on 9/11 called Unspeakable. You wrote some music for it. Avery's film, along with many other resources, was a wake-up call for me. After 2 decades, I don't know what more to say about 9/11. I feel like you either get it at this point or you don't, and nothing has been done about it. It seems nothing can be done. If we look at history, it's filled with countless examples of states' terrorism by nations and empires, and basically they get away with it. Over time, the false official narrative has cemented itself. It seems the further we get away from September 11th, 2001, the less chance we have for true justice coming to light. So, what are your thoughts and feelings on 9/11 20 years later, as well as, tell us about Unspeakable and the work in producing music that you did for it?
So, when Seven came out, which was a film that he did for Architects and Engineers a year ago, he reached out to Ramo, because Ramo did the original kind of Loose Change track back in the day, and he wanted him to do a track for Seven. And then Ramo just reaches out to me and says, Parker, you want to play some guitars? I was like, absolutely. It's one of Dylan's movies, of course, and your song. So we did that a year ago. And then this year, the same thing happened again. Dylan reaches out to Ramo to do another track because it's a 20-year anniversary. Now, interesting thing about it, I have not seen the film yet. Ramo had only seen bits and pieces of it, and I think that this is more of a thoughtful. This is just about the families arriving kind of at the place that you're describing, which I don't like saying this, but I think that I've long ago come to a place that I don't. There are things that will not be reconciled in our lifetimes. For them to be reconciled means a much larger set of events must occur. And I don't, we're still talking about JFK, right? I mean, I think we all have a very good idea what happened there. But the truth has not come out about that. So I don't think that the truth about 9/11 will come out in our lifetime. If it does, it may be as a byproduct of events that are very radical to our current state of living. So anyway, so that's something that, for me, and it's also a very complex subject. I have friends that, you could broach that subject and it would just infuriate them these days. And I lost a lot of friends at that time. And it's so complex that you can't tell somebody in 15 minutes, what you think happened, because it's not the U.S. government. It's something that's far more insidious and subtle and far-reaching than that. But anyway, I don't want to get off too much on that. But yeah, so that film, I thought it was supposed to start playing this past week in New York, but I just got a text from Ramo yesterday that Dylan was finishing putting the credits on the new film, so it will be out for distribution, I guess, within the next probably a week or two, and I hope that everybody will watch it, because I know that they put a lot of heart in this, and it follows 4 families who had family members perish in 9/11.
Yeah, I was looking for it as well. I thought it would be published. It would go to the theater first for like a week somewhere in New York, and then it would go up on YouTube. Like I thought it was the 17th or tomorrow, but I guess we'll just wait a little bit longer, and then. And I would agree with you on, you kind of put it succinctly, what's going on with 9/11. Like, it's not, I mean, we're still talking about JFK, and it would take, like, it would be, these civilizational radical events would be like, wars or complete radical political economic revolution that would lead up to or be a consequence of revealing of what happened really on 9/11. And like I said, history shows us that so many countries, it's not just the United States, and you said it's not the U.S. government, it's this, deep state insidious force that's been around since forever.
Biden could have been the hero in this. He could have taken the withdrawal, which was already set up to happen, and we were supposed to withdraw on May 31st. He did not do that. And by doing that, he further infuriates the Taliban, and we didn't get anything out of the deal by waiting longer for him to do this. I mean, it's not like we waited because we needed to get some things together. We got nothing together. We left people behind. We left our allies behind. We left trucks. We left money. We left weapons. We left vehicles. For what purpose? I'm not sure. I do not think it's incompetence, because it would be incompetence so far off the charts as to be really just, I don't think that's what happened. There's another agenda at foot which we could, theorize on. But point being is, right now, we had infrastructure failures here in the U.S. in the first months of this year. Texas, massive energy-producing power grid, fails. Okay, so there's 3 power grids in the United States, of which the Texas power grid is one of them. So you're telling me, and even my father, I grew up in the oil business, full disclosure here, hate me if you want to, I grew up in the oil business. My dad knows a lot about the oil business, and he even bought it, that, we just couldn't handle it. I don't think that's the case. I think it was political retaliation for being a red state. Straight up, that's what I think it was. And then, we had issues in Florida later. So we are in what I believe is a controlled collapse once again. And the demoralization of the American people is what's happening. And most people, it depends on your political alignment. Some people see this as, some people are angry about it, like myself, and they tend to lean to maybe more conservative or libertarian type views, where those on the left who hated Trump, and really that is their only platform, is their hatred of Trump. So now they're embracing the vaccine, which ironically was partially brought to you by Trump. They're embracing the COVID lockdowns ad infinitum for the rest of our lives, and turning in your neighbor, spying on your neighbor, an ongoing police state. So those are the two kind of things that we have in America now, which are, in some ways, I don't want to use, when you say civil war, it seems a little bit, I don't know, I don't like using, but there's certainly a war of polarity happening within the United States. What I think it's really about is a loss of identity of the United States, and that was intended to happen.
Yeah, I just wanted to get maybe just for a quick moment to theorize a bit on what you mentioned about Afghanistan. Just to toot my horn a little bit, because I need the support of that. But it seems like, just like Antidote has, I've been front running a lot of topics. I got kind of a lot of attention last year for doing the first interview with Francis Boyle, the bioweapons expert, who
I saw that.
Who said it was a bio weapon, and it blew up. I even had the Associated Press and NATO write a piece mentioning that on me the same week that my Patreon was terminated in February. Very
Go figure.
Coincidences. And I had Scott Ritter, the UN weapons inspector, talk about, just like a few months ago, I think it was back in the spring, like March or something, or April, talking about Afghanistan, and pretty much what he said would happen is happening. So like a lot of guests that I have on are telling you the future, and I have listeners who tell me that. They say my Telegram channel and my podcast tells you what happens months in advance. But just your theory, I also agree with you. I don't think it's incompetence what they did in Afghanistan, and none of this is incompetence. They have strategic plans. They're not that stupid. And what do you think? When you mention war, is this the obvious? Like yesterday, I was watching the 60 Minutes Australia. They put out basically a propaganda piece about war with China, and they're really pushing it aggressively. Like basically saying, we're going to have a war with China, the West, and it feels like this is the preparations for war with China. And I don't know if that's what you're thinking. What happened with the Taliban, that has something to do with moving in, arming them, something to do with war with Russia and China. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, let me applaud you for doing the work that you're doing. And I mean, all of the episodes that I've watched in preparation for this, it is excellent work. So you actually give me hope. I have been producing shows for other people for the last couple of years, and this is the ongoing battle within myself. And do I have the guts to do what you're doing right now and say these things? And so I applaud you for doing that. In regards to Afghanistan, in regards to a war with China, it's just like the hyperinflation talk. I've been hearing this for decades. I mean, the war with China that's been like a meme even before there were memes. For people that had their ears to the ground, that seemed like the die had already been casted. At some point, we're going to do this thing. And even before Biden got in, there was talk that eventually we were going to have hyperinflation. So I think that the chances of those things happening, certainly with hyperinflation, that's going to happen for sure within the U.S. The war with China, I hope that it doesn't happen, but I think that the way that it happens is it's already happening. It's just not happening in a way that people listen. This is the 21st century, so we shouldn't be fighting wars in those old ways. I mean, information, viruses, finances, that's kind of the new way to wage war. But to your question about the Afghanistan thing, it does make you wonder, why did we leave all of that money? Why did we leave all those vehicles? Why do we leave all those guns? Now, there is arguments, those vehicles are not going to run because we pour chemicals into the engines, which makes the engine seize. I don't know if that's true or not. All I know is we left a ton of money and a ton of armaments and vehicles. And at the very least, the aircraft that we left could be seized by China and just back engineered if they haven't already taken our technology back in the 90s through the Clintons, like they did with the nuclear submarines, which you may or may not remember. But anyway, it does make you wonder if somehow we were arming the Taliban for a future conflagration with China or someone else, which, let me just pivot for a second. I heard one of your guests said something really interesting the other day about China. I forget the gentleman's name, but he was talking about this idea that the elites kind of envision China as their model society, and that they're going to use China, but China, being too smart for that, is going to kind of double cross the elites. And what I would say to that, I partially agree with that. However, I guess what I would say is what I would count on in regards to China or the elites or any country, what you can count on is for that country, an entity to act in its own best interests. At the end of the day, they're going to act in their own best interests. And I've got to take my hat off to China. I think the whole COVID thing was blamed on China partially as general what's the word I'm looking for? Deniability, plausible deniability. You mentioned all of the various simulations and wargaming that occurred regarding COVID. So I'm not saying that China wasn't involved. I'm just saying they made a great scapegoat because there were other people that were partnered with this, including the United States and including some of these transnationalist elitists who have the Great Reset and these things on their mind. But by blaming it on China, this is all strictly China's doing, that gives us this plausible deniability. And now I see this article that came out today in the Daily Mail where they're talking about the fact that I think George Webb mentioned this probably a year and a half ago, saying that the first signs of COVID may have actually shown up in China in October of 2019 at those military tournament games that they were having. And that came out in the UK Mail or the Daily Mail today. So as far as a war with China, I hope that never happens. But in some ways, I think that we're already in it, and this is 21st century warfare.
Yeah, I would agree. I've spoken a number of times with Gregory Copley, a defense expert who briefs the Pentagon, and people can check out the interview I've done with him. He calls it the new total war, just as you described it. We're in it already.
So with that, you can see that they're having a really critical conversation about the nature of all these events. And I love this kind of open-mindedness where we have to be prepared to face the enemy and to find and discover the enemy wherever they may be, rather than just, it's interesting because he said that we can count on China to act in China's own best interests, but with the perverse and corrupt leaders that we have here in the United States, we can't count on Joe Biden to do what's in the best interest of the United States, not in Afghanistan and not any other situation. So you can see that the difficulty that we're dealing with is a matter of subversion at the highest level. You can see that they're bringing in leaders into the Pentagon, and the establishment within the Pentagon either is working with this Black Lives Matter Marxist ideology, or they're too afraid to challenge it for fear of their jobs. I'm not really sure what the situation is there, but we're in a dangerous strait in America. I mean, they've already widened the Panama Canal. They widened it 10 years ago, and it's it can fit the Chinese Navy through it now. When in the past you could only have one ship at a time, now it's greatly. And of course, you have to recognize that the Chinese Communist Party is in control in large part of the Panama Canal, just like they're in the control of the ports in Los Angeles for whatever reason. And we have to face the reality that we're being set up to be defeated by the Chinese military. And I think that's something that people can't recognize. They can't recognize and connect the connections. They can't understand the university strategy. They can't understand what happened in Ingolstadt. They can't understand what happened with Cecil Rhodes and the Alfred Milner and the Round Table secret societies, the influence that they have. They can't understand the work that Albert Pike was doing to create this radicalization and to create the disaster that we had during the Civil War, which created the empire of the United States and created executive orders under the Lincoln administration and every subsequent administration. People can't just follow the history. They're being diluted and they're being dumbed down to such an extent that maybe even you're listening now and you think that the earth is flat. And I can't help you. There's nothing anyone can do for you. I mean, you're just going to believe whatever you choose to believe, and ultimately whatever the strongest, the most powerful intellect, the most influential mind that comes around you is going to convince you of whatever the next thing is you will believe. So you have to test things, and you have to use your own reason. You can't rely on the work of others. You have to do your own work in this regard. So that was a very just fascinating conversation. And like we were introduced to the figure of Maurice Strong, who is central in the United Nations in creating this idea of the ideology behind sustainability and environmentalism. It's become radicalized today, so that people, if they believe that you're not doing things in favor of the environment, they'll just go insane, and they're at the point now where they might burn themselves alive. I'm not sure. They're literally losing their stuff because they believe the propaganda and they believe the data that's been shaped and prepared for them, and they're true believers. That's what you have. That's what you have in the world is a series of cannon fodder and true believers and useful idiots all marching together. So, as we're moving forward here, I have another just fascinating article. You just have to hear it. And look, all these different clips that we're playing, if I haven't introduced the authors or the podcasts or the books or the lecturers or the author, the researchers, if I haven't given enough of the information, I'm on a limited time basis. And all of the information is in the show notes, so I hope you'll go back through and take a closer look at what the discussion is really all about. And I hope that you'll give me some feedback here. And we're working hard to make sure that relevant and extraordinarily profound information that is being, usually, the really good stuff is being hidden, or it's being just not talked about, or propaganda instruments are being used to suppress it, or what have you. So we're just going to continue to fight the good fight and try to bring to you the unmitigated truth of what people are thinking, the real thinkers, the people that are not afraid to speak and who are not, don't have their eyes closed. I noticed that there's a really enormous a white building. It's bigger than football fields. It's this huge white building, and it's a sculpture really in New York City. And it's just a really big closed eye. It's a huge eye, which is of course an Illuminati symbol, but it's closed. And I think that it's totally connected to the events of 9/11. That America, the eyes of America are closed in regarding the truth and what happened there. So we need to just press this. And of course, we have in the show notes of this episode the video of Building 7, and you can see that it was demolished with the professional grade accuracy and symmetry, just like the other buildings, and it was pooled and the floors are detonated with timing, so that one after another of the detonations are taking off, and it's just slowly and gradually collapsing the building on top of itself, the way that you would do any old building. And that's what happened on 9/11. I mean, it was a professional military grade psychological operation and a military precision attack of the deep state within the government against those buildings and against the people of America. And so that needs to be known, because until those issues are worked out, they're going to continue to run these operations on us. They're going to continue to kill and murder the people that are in their way, and destroy those buildings and set off nuclear explosions. I mean, that's what's forecast in the Hollywood script, in the data, in the information that's coming down as far as the back channel, watching the chatter, as it were, that's coming down, that ultimately we're going to be looking back at movies that told us specifically what was going to happen, but we just didn't see it. So that's the kind of thing you're dealing with here. Hollywood is pumping it out, it's being put in our faces, and it's being spelled out what's going to happen. And it has to go back. You guys have to recognize that it's the secret treaty of Verona, it's the Congress of Vienna, it's the old power players, the old Illuminati sector from Bavaria, it's the old powerhouse, the nobility and the aristocracy of Europe. It's coming together, joined with the papacy that's reinvigorated and re-empowered, being controlled. I mean, we have to talk about the Jesuit order, because the Pope Bergoglio is a Jesuit, has been his entire life, and he was the man who was the archdiocese, or what have you, the archbishop over Argentina for many, many decades. And of course, Argentina was the place where the rat lines went and hit all the high-level Nazis, right? After World War II, they went to Argentina. So all these things are part of a whole, pieces of a whole, and you need to understand that. And I know that to know the truth is a dangerous thing, but if we're going to survive this, if we're going to make the right calculations, if we're going to strike at the targets that we need to face in our lives, whether it's, building up the supplies we need for our future, whether it's cutting off the things out of our lives that we no longer need, whether it's, taking part in cooperative political action with your neighbors. We have to do what it takes. We need the right information. We need the right data. In these info wars, in this era of cyber technocracy, it's a tyranny. And the way to control you is by dumbing you down, giving you bullshit information and false news so that you can't really tell what's happening. So, you need to look behind the scenes of men like George Soros. You need to look at who they work with, who their affiliates are, and how they're connected and what their agenda is. And you can see that ultimately it's the depopulation agenda, and it's the slow and gradual management of the decline of America and the West. And ultimately, this is an extension of the plan of the Counter-Reformation. The Counter-Reformation, which was to roll up and destroy the effects of Western civilization so that you couldn't have a reading populace, you couldn't have people that were intelligent or educated. I mean, look at these people. They believe in a flat earth. You have to understand what that means. This is the power of the propaganda, the psychological operations that are being used against the American people. So with that, we need to listen to this very fascinating discussion. It's Jack Posobiec, it's Darren Beatty, and it's Raheem Kassam, and they're at a live event, and they're just it's a live mic, and it's a hot mic, and they're talking about the truth. And this is all going to lead up to what is our problem with the intelligence agencies in this country? What is the problem with the FBI in this country? What is the difficulty with the deep state and the CIA and the intelligence apparatus we've been having the Skull and Bones men siphoned through Yale into the Skull and Bones Society, into the FBI and the CIA, into high-level government positions for many, many, many decades. For 100 years that's been going on, because they were founded in 1833. Skull and Bones at Yale. They were founded in 1833, and at that point, Alphonso Taft was one of the men who was a founder, and he was, him and his children were going to immediately become congressmen and judges and senators and president. So the very first generation of Skull and Bones men had a president. So you need to focus like a laser on the Skull and Bones issue. I mean, that's what was happening with George Bush, the younger, right? George Bush, the son, he was up against John Kerry, and John Kerry was just a Skull and Bones man. They both went to the same school. They both went to the same secret society. It didn't matter who won. They ultimately were going to have a Skull and Bone presidency because it was the 9/11 time. It was time for 9/11 to happen, and it was going to happen regardless of whether Republican or Democrat won. So let's go ahead and just give this a pause and listen to this fascinating discussion. I'm trying to illuminate your mind.
Wow, it's like Raheem's never left. I don't know who hogs the stage more, me or Jack, at these things. But I'm delighted to share a stage with him. Delighted to share a stage with Darren Beatty. Darren does real work, just amazing work at revolver.news, for those of you that don't know it. But it's such a fantastic website. It does a little bit of aggregation, but it also does a lot of investigation. And so I'm delighted to have both of you on stage here for this conversation about January the 6th. And the FBI. And before I ask the first question to Darren, I just want to have a little reminisce session with my old mate Jack over here. We were on Capitol Hill that morning. We walked down Constitution Avenue, which, for those of you that don't know, is the road that goes down straight past the Capitol building, downhill towards downtown Washington D.C. And Jack will remind me that I was absent-minded, paying attention to something else, probably swiping through girls on Instagram or something, and it's better than what most conservatives in DC are swiping for on Instagram. Indeed. So he's we actually leave because I had to get back to One American News before Trump's speech ended. So we're walking down Constitution Ave. He's not paying attention, and I say, Raheem, seems like there's a lot of people over at the Capitol. And he's like, not paying attention. I said, it seems like there's a lot of, and then we hear it. Boom, bang, boom. The first two flashbangs that went off that morning, stun grenades, if you're not familiar with the parlance. So we actually were there walking down Constitution Avenue on January 6th when the first kind of conflagration started. And it was at that point, obviously, we realized that things were not going according to plan. Well, so and let's ask that question then. As Darren's contention would be, perhaps they were. Well, that's the point. Darren, January the 6th, intelligence failure or intelligence operation?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm so delighted that is the preeminent question and the preeminent focus now as to what's actually relevant in explaining the events of 1/6. Was this an intelligence failure or an intelligence setup? My news organization, as you were kind enough to mention, Revolver.News, made quite a name for itself in first advancing the thesis that is very likely an intel setup. And our argument to begin with was quite simple. We looked at the charging documents for some of the highest profile indictments related to 1/6 offenses, the militia groups like the Oath Keepers and so forth. And what we found was something very bizarre. What we found was that in the charging documents themselves, there were many people referenced, unindicted, who, according to the narration of the events, committed acts far more egregious than those indicted. There was an undeniable case of selective non-prosecution. And so we asked why. Why are there some people mentioned in these documents who are not charged with anything when all of these little fish are charged with anything possible? How do you explain that? That the little fish are getting charged and some of the bigger fish, the higher ranked people in these militia groups, go free.
And to explain for everybody what he was specifically looking at were the conspiracy charges, right? So this idea that the militias planned to go in and conduct an operation of takeover of the Capitol, right? So they're charging people with this conspiracy, or at least conspiracy to start a riot. And yet, so they're going through these text messages and Facebook chats and encrypted chats in some areas, and yet there's certain people who are charged, and there's some people who are not charged. And it seems like the people that weren't charged were the ones really driving the push for more aggressive action, or to use the parlance of the conspiracy charge, is overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. And yet those people are not charged.
In many cases, yes, and that's deeply suspicious. Of course, there could be different explanations for this, but to motivate one's intuition as to what the most likely explanation would be, one could look through the entire history of the FBI and how they set up events. But you don't need to go back to the 60s and 70s. You only need to go back, and this is what we reported at Revolver.News, our original report. You only need to go back a couple months before the so-called insurrection of 1/6 to the infamous kidnapping plot. There was a kidnapping plot of domestic terrorists who wanted to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and that's why we need to mobilize the entirety of America's national security apparatus to destroy these fearsome domestic terrorists. But guess what? It turns out not only did this so-called kidnapping plot also involve a plot to storm the Michigan state capitol, not only did it also involve one of the main militia groups also imputed to 1/6, it turns out that 12 out of the 26 plotters were either federal informants or undercover agents.
Including the number one guy and the number two guy.
Exactly. That is a hell of a ratio. 12 out of 26 undercover, and who not only sat back and let it happen, but played an active participatory role in making the event happen. And another interesting detail. The head of the Detroit FBI field office who oversaw this Michigan infiltration operation, Stephen D'Antuono, the day after these so-called plotters were arrested, FBI Director Wray promotes him to the D.C. field office, where he goes on to oversee the 1/6 investigation. How fishy is that? And in light of that context, how do we explain the selective non-prosecution of some of the key militia members imputed to the events of 1/6? Don't touch them. And And all the little fish, anyone who seemingly set foot in Washington, D.C. on that day with a MAGA hat is rotting in prison. And yet some of the top-level militia people who have done everything and more that the indicted people did, they're not touching them, and in some cases, not even searching them, because they don't want to know what's in their phone, because if they find, as the New York Times reported, one of the Proud Boys was texting his FBI handler, if they find text like this, they're obligated to turn it over to the defense. So they don't want your communications if you're an informant, and that's why some of these people have not only been protected from indictment, they've been protected from the standard basic search. Makes no sense unless you look at the possibility, very troubling from our point of view, that this wasn't just an intelligence failure. We know they're incompetent. It was an intelligence setup.
So, well, let me just follow up question here as well, because, you know, in my 6 years I've spent in this country so far, I have found that Americans, especially conservative Americans, love their institutions. And there's at the Monocle restaurant in Washington D.C. There's an inscription above the door. Institutions are more important than people, and it's a hallmark of traditional conservatism. Actually, is building institutions, preserving institutions. So my follow-up question to all of this, and you know, with the assumption, because I do believe it, that 99%, if not more, of Revolver.News' theses on this is correct, then how do you get the American public to recognize that the institution must no longer exist in its... I don't believe it's... Let me ask it that way. Do you believe the FBI is reformable?
That's a very interesting question, and I will answer. I'll give the answer that I gave on TV on the Tucker Carlson show when he asked me about this, and I said, look, I think it's very important for everyone to understand this. Our politics in this country will, for the most part, be fake and performative. Fake and performative unless we bring the national security state to heel. We focus on elections, we focus on all of these performative things. Without bringing the national security state under control, all of these things will be fake and amount to nothing. And this is the broader context for understanding the FBI intelligence setup of January 6th. It's the context in which to understand the broader repurposing of our national security apparatus domestically in order to silence, suppress, crush the energies associated with Donald Trump's victory in 2016. Unless we find the organizational capacity, the guts, the brains to bring the national security state to heel, it's all fake.
When you have listened to Darren, and he's been talking about this for almost a year now, right? Because we are coming up on the 1 year. It'll be the 1 year anniversary of the election of 3 November, and then it'll be the 1 year anniversary of 1/6. And you can imagine, by the way, I can tell you without a doubt, the theatrics and the ceremony that are going to be played out, the pageantry on the 1 year anniversary of 1/6 is going to be like nothing you've seen. We did the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and it passed with barely more the perfunctory memorial. 1/6 is going to be enshrined. Nancy Pelosi will be up there. There will be garlands of flowers.
Black
armbands, you name it, right? But if you listen to Darren's thesis, it's very important, and it's also important to know. And I come to this from, you know, a different side of the table, where I was the guy on the other side of the table as an intelligence officer, conducting these sorts of operations with working as handlers, working with informants, not here in the United States, but overseas. You know, you work with informants, of course you do. That's what you do when you're trying to, in my case, it would be collect intelligence. But of course, I was privy to other operations that were going on and other types of setups like the one that he's speaking of. And so the problem, though, is that Afghanistan has now been turned off, and we saw how that went. Most of the wars around the world have been shut off by and large. And so the national security state, though, still exists, and they need something to do. So I talked about it when I wrote my Antifa book last year, and they said, well, they refused to do anything about Antifa. So they need to target those energies towards something else. So first it was QAnon, right? QAnon was the first one. But then that didn't really go anywhere because it turned out that wasn't this big Illuminati Freemason setup like they thought it was going to be. It's actually just, not that many people to begin with. Look at what Chris Rufo and Steve Bannon just talked about it. What he found, that they are going to start classifying people who protest the teaching of critical race theory in their school boards as domestic terrorists. Why would they do that? Well, because they're seeing the energies that start up the same way as Donald Trump's 2016 victory. What was it? It was Facebook groups, it was Twitter chat groups, it was events like this where people come together and say, we want to stand against the regime, we want to stand against the ruling class, we want to stand against the power structure. And so they know that those are the networks that need to be disrupted. So network disruption is the name of the game here. It's not even necessarily locking people up. It's shutting you down, it's breaking you apart, it's making these networks dissent, it's making them not able to function together, not able to put on great events like this one. That is the goal, because they know that's exactly how you institute these demotivational forces towards anything. So it's the chilling effect, number one, of classifying you as a domestic terrorist, but also, number two, the ability to break up any of that movement before it attains critical mass.
Darren, I want to bring you back to one of the points you made about how you don't have to go that far back to realize what's happened here. But if you indulge us to go back a little bit, I heard you talking on Matt Gaetz's podcast last week about a lot of this stuff. I mean, the tactics are not necessarily new. And the end goal isn't even necessarily new. Rage Against the Machine used to sing about the end of history theory, Fukuyama's, globalist wet dream, for want of a better word. And I wonder if you can sort of enlighten us, because it was a surprise to me looking into this, how for decades a lot of these tactics have been so readily deployed.
Yes, absolutely. These tactics are nothing new. They go back a long time, and as Jack pointed out, the primary objective is disrupting organization and preventing momentum from developing within movements that these agencies perceive as a threat. And unfortunately, they don't perceive anything as great of a threat now as basically populism, both from the left and the right. And this is why most of the coverage of these issues has actually taken place on the left. And a lot of people who are associated with the left have been covering the FBI's history of disrupting protest movements and so forth. And in the war on terror, the first war on terror, the second war on terror is against us. The first war on terror, they were doing the same thing. In many cases, a lot of Muslims were set up. They were simply set up. An astonishing detail that I learned while researching all of this for Revolver.news is the bomb that was made that eventually went off in the World Trade Center for the first attack. That bomb was made by an FBI informant. The bomb in the first World Trade Center attack was made by an FBI informant. It's amazing stuff.
There's to go on that one. I talk about this publicly every once in a while, but I had my cousin and her husband were standing at the finish line of the Boston Marathon when the attack happened in April 2013. She lost both of her legs. He lost one of his. And the more you dig on that one, you find that these guys were well known to federal law enforcement. One of them was even somehow seemingly able to travel back and forth to Dagestan, right, which is in the Caucasus, part of Chechnya, without a passport. Returns back. I don't know how you travel anywhere overseas without a passport. Right now you need a COVID passport, but he's able to travel back and forth with impunity. There's murders taking place that are tightly associated with them that seemingly go unsolved. There was a Jewish brother at a pizza shop and his two brothers. And then you come to find that neither of them had the technical expertise to construct the bombs that were made at the Boston bombing. this thing about Inspire magazine that put out, that is, make a bomb in your mom's kitchen, that had nothing to do with the bombs they're used. These were sophisticated bombs. And yet the FBI, when you go and ask them about these questions, it turns into a black hole. And sources within the Boston Police Department say that every time they tried to find out who actually made the bombs, the FBI would come in, take all the evidence, and it would disappear.
How about that? So it's nothing new. It's just what's new about this version is that all of these efforts are targeted against the deplorables, generally speaking. That the deplorables are the new designated group that the government is going to use its incredible resourcefulness and ruthlessness and lack of any sense of ethics to go after. And partially this is to justify their budgets. The first war on terror is kind of played out with a punctuation mark, as we saw in Afghanistan. So now they need a new justification for their insane budgets. But partially it's a part of this ideological consolidation that you're seeing across the American regime, which I've come to call not even America, but the globalist American empire.
So I think that little piece of information took our breath away, and the audience, and probably you there in your car or at home or wherever you're at listening to this information. The FBI was complicit in supplying the bomb that went off in the Trade Center. They had to make sure that they blew it up. What would have happened if it would have brought the tower down? I mean, obviously those buildings are enormous. But it just goes to show you that the intelligence community is not trustworthy, is dangerous, and is moving the pieces on the game board to advance the agenda of the globalists and the elite. Obviously, those are the money powers, the banking institutions. And when we look behind there, we can see that a lot of the gold that was in the World Trade Center was confiscated and taken in the process of the cleanup. And so ultimately there was another level of theft there. Like I said before, in my mind, it was another way to handle the insurance claim instead of how costly would it be for Manhattan to be shut down as they take that building carefully apart and the environmental regulations. The cost would be staggering, but just to drop it the way they did was to create an international incident and to further the agenda, to create a new American crusade against Islam was part of the agenda there. So in order to further this conversation and take this into the true depth we're getting beyond the censors now. We're getting past the forbidden stage of being able to return. We're going beyond the top secret confidential dynamic in the military-industrial complex, as far as penetrating the truth here and understanding what's really happening, the secrets, and what's really going on behind the scenes. And in order to do that, in order to understand the globalists and the international agenda, we need to understand who are the power players and the power structure itself. So in order to further that conversation, we're going to listen to another researcher here, and we're going to take it to the next level.
And the foremost is Augustine. Augustine hated the Jews. And so therefore, the Augustinians imbibed their hatred for Jews in a religion that they'd created for Arabs, who are the natural enemies of the Jews, pursuant to the Bible. That the sons of Ishmael would always be against the sons of Isaac. And so they fashioned a religion for the Arab people to fit this biblical controversy between the sons of Isaac and the sons of Ishmael. And thus Islam never persecutes from a Catholicism. In fact, Islam goes in about the 8th century. And Islam goes into Spain, Portugal area, and it conquers the Visigoths. The Visigoths were non-Roman Catholic Christians. And after they used Islam to kill out the Visigoths or drive them over the Pyrenees into France, then the Vatican uses its military to drive the Muslims ultimately out of Spain, and by 1606 they're out. So we see many, many examples of Islam being used to destroy the enemies of the papacy. And why? Because Islam created it in North Africa by the Augustinians tutoring Muhammad. And one of Muhammad's wives had been a Roman Catholic nun.
Yeah, that's interesting when you look at his life. And now we're talking, what, in the 8th century now?
7th century.
7th century, okay. So, yeah, and when you start reading the Quran, you see so many similarities to Roman Catholicism, don't you?
I mean, it's a warlike religion, exactly as the papacy. It calls for the conversion of the infidel with the sword, just as Roman Catholicism calls for the conversion of the heretic with a sword, as Thomas Aquinas wrote in his Summa Theologica, and I have it quoted in my book. They're identical.
So now let's fast forward to 9/11, and you see throughout the 1960s. You know, I'd like to talk about that for a moment. Then we'll hit 9/11 because we've in a sense left it off the table on many radio shows, connecting the dots between how terrorism was orchestrated by the Jesuits. We hear about 9/11, and there's still constantly information coming out about really what happened. But
by the way, before I forget, I put a recent post up on my website on Tim Risser.
Okay.
And that relates to him implying that 9/11 was an inside job on June 1st, 2008. And 12 days later, he's dead.
Yeah, interesting. I was just talking about him with a friend the other day, too. Let's hold that thought and maybe touch on him in the second half hour, but I wanted to get back. Many people don't realize the Jesuit roots in Iraq and how they were kicked out of the country, I believe, in the late 1960s. I think we could start there and then move our way into how terrorism has been orchestrated and how these organizations have been fomented by Western money to create this controversy between the Muslims and Christians now that's going on in the world. Go ahead. Start in the 60s with the Jesuits in Iraq. Interesting.
Okay, let me go a little bit before that, Greg, if I can. When Muhammad died, there became a schism between the Muslim people as to who would be his successor. The ones that chose the successor to be Ali were the ones that were called then the Shia Muslims. And so we have this schism after the death of Muhammad between the Sunnis and the Shia. And they are mortal enemies one toward another. The Sunnis hate them and regard them as infidels. And so the Shia now, because the Shia are also really the enemies of the papacy, because the Sunni Islam was created by Rome. Shia Islam was not created by Rome. And so now we have this enemy of the papacy called Shia Islam. And even Suleiman the Magnificent fought against the Shia. Saladin fought against the Shia, according to the count. And so Shia are the target, because to have a unified Islam against the West, you have to neutralize the Shia peoples. Where do they live? They live in southern Lebanon, they live in Iraq, they live in Iran, they live in Afghanistan, and some of them live in, I believe, a portion of Somalia. That's only where the Shiites live. So, therefore, this crusade with, in 1960, or going to 1960 now, the Jesuits had a very lovely university in Baghdad called Baghdad University. I believe it was the New York province, either the Maryland province or the New York province, that had established this Baghdad University in Iraq for the purpose, of course, training its leaders, and its leaders would then be subject to the papacy. In 1969, the Shia of Iraq expelled the Jesuit order from their country. Now that is
Why did they do that? Because they're meddling in politics like they do here?
That's right, because they were meddling in their politics. So the Shia wouldn't put up with it. So they kicked them out. And some of the leaders then went down in airplane crashes shortly after that. In 1971, the Jesuits bring the Ba'ath Party to power and put Saddam Hussein in power. And what does he do? He persecutes the Shia people of Iraq. He involves them in the Iraq-Iranian war so the Shia can mutually kill each other. And all of this is financed by the U.S. Jesuit-controlled government, because if you read a tremendous book called, I think it's called Spider's Web, it's The Illegal Army of Iraq by Friedman, he shows you during the Reagan administration for 8 years that his administration armed both sides, Iraq and Iran, during the Iraq-Iranian war because they want to kill off all the Shia.
Yeah, and you see some pictures that are still floating around of Donald Rumsfeld seeming very friendly with Saddam Hussein as they're shaking hands and wondering, I'm wondering what they're talking about behind the scenes, but I guess we can fill in the gap here. They're probably, again, fomenting war there, correct?
Absolutely. The Shia peoples of Iraq and Iran have to be brought down in order to completely unify Islam. It's just like you have to completely bring down all Protestant sects. Just like this heretic we heard about in the news broadcast. You have to bring down all Protestant sects and submit them to the Pope by the National Council of Churches, World Council of Churches, and you got to do the same thing with the Orthodox. You got to subject the Orthodox Christian Church to the primacy of the Bishop of Bishops in Rome. So they have the same principle applied to Islam. You must subject the Shia to the Pope of Rome, and since they won't submit, we have to kill them, and then they will submit to our Sunni leaders, and then our Sunni leaders will lead the way in the crusade against the West. So right now they are conducting a crusade against the Shia Muslims. We see this very same thing when Israel invades in 2006 into southern Lebanon. Of course, Hezbollah started it, but Hezbollah is run by the Knights of Malta. And the Knights of Malta run in Hezbollah with their hospital there on the border, according to the count, in southern Lebanon. They then recruit all the young Shia men to fight in Hezbollah, and then incite Israel to come and invade southern Lebanon, which they never won, and kill the Shia people. So it's a war on the Shia of all fronts. I believe when they detonate Detroit, there's the largest Shia Muslim population in the United States in Detroit. They're going to go up in smoke. It's all a crusade now against the Shia.
I want to talk about that, what you just said about Detroit. But first, just give us just a little bit of background. So we have the papacy creating Islam. How did this schism happen? Why did the Shiites rebel against the papacy? What was the main reason there that you found out?
As I perceive it, the papacy, being in control of Muhammad, wanted to continue its absolute control over Islam after his death with his successor that succeeded him, that was a Sunni. I can't remember his name right now. And with this Ali laying claim to being the descendant of Muhammad, the Muslims who followed him, they became what is called Shia. And this now is totally out of control of the papacy. Papacy now is losing control of this sect called the Shia through Ali. And so the Jesuits now control the Jesuit papacy, have to rid the Islam of this schism, so that Islam can be united for the purposes of the papacy. And one of those purposes is to be used against North America.
I think looking at, the Jesuits thrown out of Iraq, we have our domestic and foreign policy we see the ties between Spellman back in the Vietnam War, and we move our way into now this war on terror after communism falls, and that is orchestrated as well. But just for just a refresher course, people may not be able to get their mind around how our government, how the Jesuit order can create a terrorist organization that can work its way into America, do the damage they've done on 9/11, and then create this whole propaganda campaign that the people of Islam are all behind this, so that they can whip up a war between the two. So tell us how this is funded, how they can operate this way, how the Jesuit order really works behind the scenes, so that when people present this premise, they can back it up. Because most people in America still believe that the Jesuits have nothing to do with 9/11. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Okay. To begin with, we have to remember there weren't any Muslims on those airplanes. The airplanes were empty. Those airplanes were guided into the buildings by the military-industrial complex of this country. And as I've said for 10 years now, George J. Tenet, Knight of Malta, the DCI at the time, Director of Central Intelligence, a Roman Catholic, trained by Jesuits at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, he was the mastermind of 9/11. So therefore, this Knight of Malta, George J. Tenet, his master, at the time then, was the head of the federal branch of the Knights of Malta, which at the time was Edward Cardinal Egan. Edward Cardinal Egan was the Archbishop of New York City. He's now been replaced by Timothy Dolan. And so Edward Cardinal Egan was the Darth Vader, was the overseer of the entire 9/11 scenario using his DCI, George J. Tenet, just as Cardinal Spellman was the overseer of the assassination of JFK using his Knight of Malta DCI, John McCone. It's the same system, but with different players. Now, with this 9/11 that they brought about, they then justified a crusade into Afghanistan in the following month. Afghanistan was invaded on October 7th, 2001. October 7th is a very important day in history because it's on October 7th, 1571, that the Battle of Lepanto was fought between the forces of Suleiman the Magnificent and the Holy Roman Emperor with his Knights of Malta and the Jesuits. And the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 is considered the most important sea battle in world history, second only to the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, when Octavian defeated Cleopatra's fleet and then went down to Egypt, killed her, and took over the kingdom. So this Battle of Lepanto is extremely important for the listeners to remember because on October 7th it took place, Suleiman was defeated, the Middle East was opened up to the Crusaders once again, and it's on this very same October 7 day that the U.S. invades Afghanistan. So they start the crusade of 7th, 2001, against the Shia of Afghanistan, primarily. So that's kind of where it starts, and so now here we have it. And then the other thing I want to stress is that because the vast majority of white people in this country are ignorant as to these historical facts, they are successfully being herded into right-wing white Jesuit fascism. I just saw a guy emailed me a truck with a bumper sticker on it, and it has the Twin Towers burning. He said, I learned all that I need to know on 9/11, but I learned all I need to know on Islam about 9/11. And it was a redneck somewhere down in the South somewhere. He had the Confederate flag, and he had this painted on the back of it. I thought, this is exactly what they're doing. They're inciting these people, these white people primarily, to unite under a fascist resistance and fight this crusade because they refuse to believe that 9/11 was an inside job of this government.
Exactly. And then if we start really looking behind the scenes and looking at all the facts that prove that, we have to go one step farther and then decide, and try to uncover who was behind it and how they orchestrate these things. And that's where it's very important to begin to look at the Jesuit order behind the scenes, and all of their shenanigans throughout the course of history seems to be forgotten by the American people, and this is why they can get away with it. You make a fact in your book, Vatican Assassins, that they've been kicked out of over 80 countries in world history. And this is only since the 1530s when they were formed, correct?
From the 1540 to, about 1931, according to Jesuit Thomas Campbell, who was the former president of Fordham University. He lists 83 countries, cities, and states that they had been expelled from since their creation. But the other point I wanted to make was that the question is, well, what makes you think the Jesuit order did this if it's Cardinal Egan and the Knights of Malta? My point in my book is that the Jesuits have been in complete control of the papacy since no later than 1814, after their formal revival by a bull issued by Pope Paul VII. And in that bull, he gives them all their previous privileges and immunities. And in about 1886 or so, Pope Leo XIII was poisoned. And he was approached by a Jesuit and said, listen, you've been given a poison. We only have the antidote. And he said, you will sign this bull, giving us all of our previous power back. And if you don't, you're going to die. If you do, we'll give you the antidote. And so Leo XIII signed the bull. He was given the antidote, and he lived. So now, what they've done is they have created this agitation. It's the Pope's agitation. Remember, he's the one that's established Gaza. He's the one that's established West Bank. He's the one that wants to establish East Jerusalem for the Muslims. This is all from the papacy. Remembering the papacy always benefits from every dialectic, every conflict, every agitation that it creates. And so what they're doing is they are seeking to unite the Muslim world against Israel and against the U.S. And part of this unification involves the breaking away of Turkey out of the Turkey that was created by the Freemason and mass murderer Ataturk in 1922. Ataturk did away with Sharia law. And Turkey, after it had killed approximately 2 million Armenian non-papal Christians in the Armenian massacre, which Turkey denies to this day, by the way, all killing them for the benefit of the papacy, because the papacy hates the Orthodox Armenians, and Islam wielded the sword to kill them. So Turkey is being driven out of its somewhat neutral position, as it had all the way through NATO, when it was the southern flank of NATO, and now through this Gulen movement, Fethullah Gulen, this man who is probably the most influential Muslim now in the world, who went into a voluntary exile in Pennsylvania here. So you know the Maryland provincial is allowing this Gulen leader to live here, and he has a protected compound up near the Poconos somewhere. Now, what they're doing is using this Gulen movement, they are driving Turkey into the anti-Jew camp. Israel did a lot of business with Turkey.
Yeah, and this flotilla originated in Turkey, right?
Out of Turkey, that's right.
Yeah.
And the Count tells me this is the Gulen movement. Well, this makes perfect sense because the Gulen movement wants to unite Islam for the creation of a new caliphate in the Middle East, out of Baghdad, out of what used to be the center for the Ottoman Empire. And so what we have here is Turkey being pushed in this direction. Now all the Turks are boycotting Israel, exactly what the Pope wants. And this will also be another reason for the Pope to say, well, Turkey, you're not going to get in the European Union. The papacy has never wanted Turkey in the European Union, and it will never be. The only part of whatever was once Turkey was southern Cyprus, which is Greek Orthodox. They're in the EU, but northern Cyprus, which is Turkish, which was taken from the Greeks in 1974 by Henry Kissinger, is not in the EU. So this whole thing is to keep Turkey out of the EU. It is to unite Turkey on the side of the Islamic world that will be in league with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
We always must ask this question, who benefits? Well, we know that the papacy, in its control of China, and its control of Russia, and its control of the Islamic Sunni world, is planning an invasion of the American Southeast. And I cover this in my book. That is why Jimmy Carter and the Congress gave the Panama Canal locks to Panama, which later then leased out its running to a red Chinese company called Hutchison Whampoa. So the Chinese run the locks in Panama, and they're building a huge new Panama Canal there that will be finished, according to their estimates, in 1215. The Chinese are manning the locks. The red Chinese. Second of all, you have the Bahamas, which is the largest container shipping port in the Eastern Hemisphere for the most part, and China is there in the Bahamas. China is manning all the intelligence in Cuba, because you see, Cuba was given to Jesuit communist Fidel Castro to serve as a staging base for the invasion of America. Way back in 1960, that's why it was given to him. That's why Allen Dulles made sure that the Bay of Pigs fiasco failed. So we have this encirclement policy of China. Right now, China's going into Jamaica. My black Jamaican friends tell me that there's lots of young Chinese there taking all their jobs. So we have this going on. Now you have Russia with a submarine and a couple of big bombers out of Venezuela. They have their encirclement movement, and with this oil spill, I believe that if it continues, there will be a mandatory evacuation of the southeast coast. And when they evacuate those people out of the southeast coast, say, 250 miles in, you now have a clip. You now can invade because you have nobody to resist you. Remember, especially those Southerners, those Mississippians and Alabamans, they're all armed to the teeth. So we got to get those people out of the way to have a successful invasion base. That's one advantage. Another advantage is, remember, the BP is controlled by the Knights of Malta, specifically Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. She owns Royal Dutch Shell, which is a part of British Petroleum, and you have Queen Elizabeth II, who's a Dame of Malta. Both of them Bilderbergers, by the way. And so they have orchestrated this for this particular reason. Now, Juan Carlos is involved in this, too, and he is presently using his company of Centro to build the Trans-Texas Corridor, I-69, through Mexico to the U.S. and to Canada. And that will only happen with military protection. For that to happen, U.S. has to invade Mexico. What they're going to do, they're going to nationalize the oil. Oil will be nationalized, just like they nationalized the banks, just like they nationalized the auto industry. They're going to nationalize oil, and this is part and parcel of a fascist government. Fascism is always the unification between the cartel capitalists and the government of that country that these very same white cartel capitalists control.
Now let's move over to the other borders in Mexico. Let's move over to Mexico and talk about what's happening there in your recent research. How is that movement also, the illegal alien situation, creating a weakness in that part of our country, in the West?
Okay, this has been designed by the Jesuit order to Catholicize our southwestern border since 1876. And this is documented by Richard W. Thompson in his great work, The Papacy and the Civil Power, written in 1876. And so with this Jesuit design of bringing all these lower-class Mexicans into the country, the Jesuits in Mexico are making sure they're leaving, and the Jesuits here are making sure they're coming in. And the staging base for coming into the U.S. is the Jesuit stronghold of Arizona. And I posted something about this recently. It's called the San Xavier Mission near Nogales. It's not too far from the Mexican border. And this is where I believe the Jesuits, with their stronghold set up by Eusebio Kino, who is considered to be the father of the cattle country, the Jesuits are orchestrating this huge invasion through Arizona, and it will not stop. In fact, they've now incited more of this through a good piece of legislation that was signed by the governor there. But the Jesuits control her just like they control Arnold Schwarzenegger in California. The same Jesuit California provincial controls the California governor, the Arizona governor, the Hawaiian governor, and I believe the Nevada governor. He controls that particular region of his province. So what they've done is now they have brought in all these alien Catholic Mexican invaders, which are soldiers. They bring in their flag. They plant their flags at the post office, at the public schools, demanding this and that. They have no intention of being American. They want to reclaim the Southwest, claiming that it was taken from them illegally. And this is part of the Mecha Aslan rhetoric. So with this now, they have got the agitation with the Mexicans. Now they've got the agitation with the good bill that was passed by all the whites now being driven into their corner. And so now we have the perfect place now to have a race war. And when this race war starts, I maintain they're going to ignite the black on white race war. At the same time, they ignite the Latino on white race war. This will then drive all the whites to desperation. Adolf Hitler will come to power. Northcom, NORAD, Department of Homeland Security will spring into action. Blackwater will be with them, which is run by the Knights of Malta. And then they will come to the rescue and solve the problem. And here we'll have no constitution and be under martial law. And that's the purpose for the Mexican invasion. That's why Janet Napolitano doesn't want to stop. That's why George Bush didn't want to stop. That's why Barry Davis Obama didn't want to stop. It's absolutely necessary to bring America to fascist martial law to have this alien Mexican Roman Catholic and even Islamic invasion, because there are many Muslims there too.
Yeah, and they can use Arizona as a powder cake here by creating this type of strong legislation supposedly against illegal aliens.
Yeah, why didn't they do it 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Why didn't they do it 25 years ago when it was starting to happen? They waited until they have 40 million of them in the country. Now we'll pass this legislation. Now we can foment domestic insurrection and rebellion. And all the Mexicans you see, every last one of them is going to the concentration camps. That's why I tell you, Mexican people, you need to leave this country. You need to get back to Mexico as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you, what's your research centered on in the last weeks or so? What's been on your mind lately, and what have you been talking about on your radio show a lot?
I talked about George Allen, who was the past governor of Virginia. He was also a U.S. senator from Virginia. And what he did was, he was to be really the foremost Republican candidate against Obama. Well, he was credible. He did many good things. But he was given an order. And that order was to call an Eastern Indian who was born in Virginia, to call him a macaca. Now, macaca is like using the term nigger or something like that, to deliberately incite the listener, and he would then come under attack. He used the term macaca twice, deliberately. When he used this term macaca, then everybody came out and said, what are you doing using this name? And then it turns out that his mother was living in North Africa, and she had learned this term because this was the term used for the black Congolese during the days of King Leopold II, and it was also a term used for East Indians that come here called the macaca effect, that the East Indians take jobs that rightfully should be Americans. So when he used this term macaca twice on video, that completely caused him to lose the U.S. Senate race with, I believe the man was Mr. Webb, Greg Webb. And so the Democrat won the U.S. Senate seat for Virginia, one of them, and that threw a majority Democratic vote in the Senate so that they could pass what Obama-Biden want. The second thing is he was to be the presidential nominee for the Republican Party. In 2006, in December, he withdraws because of this term that he used, and now he's not really fit to run. And that ensured that they would have that decrepit loser John McCain that would ensure an Obama-Biden victory, at least in appearance. So I maintain this George Allen, and he now has what's called the Friends of George Allen. You can Google it. And it has 300 of the most powerful men you ever want to see. It's got Bill, and by the way, Bill Gates is funding the Gulen movement. It's got George W. Bush on it. It's got Carlucci, Frank C. Carlucci III, former Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, Carlyle Group. It's got several billionaires, many senators, other big bankers, Verizon, the head of Verizon, who's a knight of Malta, Bruce Babico, I believe. It's got all these power brokers that are the friends of George Allen. What for? What for? Because I maintain George Allen, who is now some sort of an authority at the Reagan Memorial Library, that's where they nested him. They're waiting to bring him to power, or somebody like him, waiting in the wings to then unite all the white people into their fascist movement. Because all of these agitations have been deliberately caused to bring some supreme fascist dictator to power, white fascist dictator to power. By the way, he's a Protestant, so we'll make him a Protestant. So we can't really trace it to Rome, right? Mm-hmm. And then once he comes to power, then he'll implement all these Department of Homeland Security. Remembering, of course, that the Department of Homeland Security was created. It's designed by John C. Gannon. John C. Gannon is a knight of Malta. John C. Gannon was in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. John C. Gannon was an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. John C. Gannon's a Jesuit, and he created the Department of Homeland Security, which I call the Department of Homeland Security. So
go ahead.
So this is what I see with this George Allen, and that was an article that I worked on, and then I just finished one on Tim Russert yesterday.
Yeah, I want to touch on Russert, but first just let me mention this. When you're doing your research out there, listeners, start at Georgetown. Start looking at a guy named Edmund Walsh, Father Edmund Walsh, and then go to Eric's book and start putting the dots together regarding all the people that have followed that man and the connections to them. You're going to be astounded how powerful these people are behind the scenes, and how no one in America knows about it, and the news media doesn't want to cover it, and the reason is they protect Rome as well, and they protect the Knights of Malta because many of the top media people are involved in the same organizations, right, Eric?
That's right. Henry Luce, the father of the Gannett newspapers and Time Live, he's a Knight of Malta. Cardinal Spellman's intimate friend. Remember, the press center of this country is Rockefeller Center, across the street from St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. The CIA is there. The CFR is there. And whatever comes out of that's run by the Knights of Malta and is facilitating the purposes of the papacy, which is headquartered at St. Patrick's Cathedral, where the Knights of Malta are headquartered. So that is how we understand that. Jesuit M.M. Walsh, he himself was a Knight of Malta.
Yeah.
So they're organizing the press and they're orchestrating everything. And anybody that gets in their way, like Tim Russert, who was trained by Jesuit at Canisius High School in Buffalo, New York. He was trained by Jesuits at John Carroll University in Cleveland, who was the personal gopher, the helper for Patrick Monahan, that Jesuit U.S. Senator out of New York who was a Fordham visiting lecturer, and he was also part of the cover-up in the JFK assassination. Tim Russert was absolutely in the Jesuit order's back pocket. They made him and created him, but when he started to go against the story of 9/11, and when he started to infer that it was an inside job on June 1st, 2008, when he was interviewing McClellan, the Bush's White House press secretary, 12 days later he was dead.
Right, and let's fill in those 12 days. Now we know that Russert also was one that he was a Meet the Press Sunday broadcaster, right? He had a big show. I'm not sure if it was Meet the Press. It was one of those Sunday shows.
Meet the Press.
Yeah, and so he was a very high profile figure in the media, working for NBC. Comes out of Jesuit University, has ties to Moynihan, like you said. And then begins to look into 9/11 and starts to get those broadcasts out about the possibility of it being an inside job. But he also starts interviewing Bush and Kerry regarding their skull and bones connections.
That's right.
And and on this radio station, you hear his voice most every day. Is saying over and over again, well, what does that mean for America? And Bush says, I have whatever Bush says. So he then, after that occurs, now he's talking about 9/11 as an inside job. He takes a trip to Rome. Unbeknownst to many people, he was in Rome just prior to his heart attack. Right. Supposedly, I believe at his son's graduation or something. But fill in the dots there for us.
Yeah, it was a celebration for his son's graduation from Boston College, Jesuit Boston College, probably the second most powerful and largest Jesuit university in the country. And he was there for a celebration, and what does he do? He has an audience with Pope Benedict XVI. He leaves Rome, he comes back to the U.S., and his wife and his son stay in Rome. I find that intriguing.
I find that very interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then not long after, he supposedly collapsed on the floor at NBC News there, which appears to me that he is in cup. And that's pursuant to the Jesuit oath of the Fourth Vow.
Mm-hmm.
Someone gave him a cup of coffee, and that was his last cup of coffee.
And strange things, no autopsy, right?
No autopsy. I have a whole list of anomalies on my site there for review. There's no autopsy. We don't even know the doctor's name who gave the autopsy. So it's a complete cover-up in his murder, and nobody's talking about it. And obviously the Jesuit hand's in it because he attacked the Iraqi war. He didn't want the war in Iraq. He mentioned or tried to lead on with the idea that it was a inside job of 9/11.
So yeah, that really wraps up the articles and different information that we were going to add in. I want to add you have a SourceWatch article on Marvin Bush that you added. I'm reading that now. It's got a lot of data points in it. It's pretty intense.
It's Wikipedia, I think.
Right, okay, so it's right out in the front like that.
It just pretty much tells you that he was guilty.
So is he the brother then?
Yeah, he's the unheard brother. No one ever talked about him.
I heard he was sitting down having dinner with, I can't remember who it was at the time. It was really suspicious. But the other Bush brother was the governor of Florida during that whole thing, Jeb Bush.
Right.
And he's a fourth degree Knight of Columbus, so that's pretty serious.
Really? So I thought they were evangelicals. I didn't know that.
Yeah, if you look it up, you can see the background. He has a special audience with the Pope and things like that. I don't know about George, but yeah, Jeb apparently is just with up there with Biden at the old Roman church there. But I think that go ahead.
So I'm thinking that the video, the Back to the Future video.
Oh.
It was really mind bending, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, we have to add that into the show notes so people can see that. But it really is disturbing how much details of the incidents that were going to occur on September 11th, how it was kind of written into the movie. And when did that come out? In like 1986, or was that too early? Maybe.
I saw it. I think you're right. I think 86.
So they had
I can't look it up right now, but I think it was 86.
They have a pretty accurate handle on what they're going to do.
I've seen the movie. I bet I've seen it 50 times.
That's the crazy part, that it becomes so ingrained in your mind, and you're not really sure. All the underlying subliminal plot, you're not really seeing it until later on. And it makes me wonder how many movies coming out of Hollywood are like that have the kind of these details.
All of them,
right?
I think all of them.
So we're pretty far down the line with
why miss an opportunity to get a message out when you have something artistic to ride on? I don't know.
Well, I mean, he was talking about, if you go further into it, he was talking about how it ties in with Fight Club, and it's kind of building up, and there's this kind of like tension that's building up in these movies towards September 11th of 2001. And it also has to do with The Matrix, came out in 1999, I think, and he's talking about the point when he's sitting with the agent in the movie, Neo. He's sitting with the agent under torture. They show a really quick scene where they flash the passport. It's John Anderson's passport or whatever, and his birthday is September 11th, 2001, or there's some kind of date. I don't know what the date is, if it's his birthday or how it's relevant, but.
And the guy that was floating upside down in juxtaposition to the window screen of the falling towers.
Right.
It would only look upside down. I mean, it would look like they were falling if you were upside down.
Right.
I don't know.
It's really just kind of disturbing, because I remember those scenes, just kind of like throwaway scenes in the movie, and I'm not really sure why I'm seeing them. Like, the window is supposed to be a TV, so she's flipping the TV channel on the window, but you're really looking through like a horizon, and it's like the World Trade Centers. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. I guess Back to the Future. In the future, there is no World Trade Centers.
I see the skeptic in me is saying no.
That's okay. We're just closing out the episode, and we went through a couple of lectures, and we just showed a few things. And I think that the point is that at this point, the deep state, if it's not the deep security state, the biosecurity state, if it's not confronted, and if it's not held accountable, then it's going to continue on this track. And we're going to continue. They're talking about COVID-19 is only the new 9/11, and I hear we're listening to another podcast, and they're talking about
It really feels like it, doesn't it? Doesn't it?
Yeah, we're kind of over the whole.
Looking back in retrospect of COVID, and then looking back on 9/11, it really, there are some very similar feelings.
Yeah, it's all the same media outlets and it's all the same personalities, and even Fauci with Biden. I mean, we've been seeing Biden in the background of our lives up in the Senate for decades, without really noticing, without really like focusing in on him. He's just been there, and Fauci too. He was dealing with the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, whatever that was, the AIDS situation. He was in the middle of that. So these personalities, this whole deep state cabal is really, I think we're going to be dealing with some new 9/11 events coming up. I'm sure that they're going to spin the thing around some more, and we really lost our way as Americans. I mean, we're under all these emergency powers. We have the Homeland Security emergency. Now we have this biomedical emergency. So they're pushing in on our biological property now. Like they seem to intend to do what they want with our physical bodies, I think that this last default, banking wise, is devastating because when we began our last default in 1929 with the Great Depression, when we had that default, we began doing birth certificates, social security numbers, death certificates, and this new taxing, and that all came as part of the program. And now, now that we're, as individual citizens with social security numbers, we're all held, like your household and my household, we're accountable for the debt per person, like up to $250,000 per person or whatever it is. And I'm sure it's going to go up more. But each of us are commercially responsible, for those debts. So once we default and we go into this hyperinflation, this spin with this Federal Reserve currency, I think that means that they're going to sweep the board and they're going to take everything that there is, and we're basically enslaved. That's what it looks like to me. During 1929, they took all the gold out of circulation as part of the default swap, and now I think the only thing we have left to barter with is our bodies.
Right. So the crisis sets the standard, right?
It really does. I mean, it feels like 9/11. All the same media outlets, all the same personalities, all the same kind of pressures, and it's the same kind of hysteria. I remember after 9/11, everyone was waving flags, and we would have invaded anywhere. And it's the same kind of popular, kind of dementia. Like it's kind of a sense of social anxiety, and people are reacting in their cowardly way, and we're wearing masks because we feel like we're not being rude to each other. It's crazy. They really are in our heads. I'm not sure where the inception point even begins. Where did it even get implanted? I guess they do it by example. I guess all of the Congress come out and everyone has to wear a mask.
Architects and engineers. They have thousands of them waiting or trying to put forward a new 9/11
scenario. So I guess you're right. I mean, that's what they were talking about. I mean, before COVID-19 hit, they were running these constant military operations that like wargaming the whole thing out. Like they had Dark Winter, and they had all these biomedical disaster war games, and then eventually the game just rolls into reality and it just rolls out. So I remember they had Jade. What was it? Jade Helm. 17.
Jade Helm, yeah.
So that's kind of like what's in the next back burner. Yeah.
That's when the military invaded parts of Texas, and they had crisis actors. I have to read up on it again. It was crazy.
Well, I'm pretty sure that
they called it the full spectrum dominance or something like that. They were trying to. And this was the human-y part of the equation. That was what Jade Helm was working on.
Well, think about it. They're probably running scenarios like that all the time, and eventually one of them is just going to unfold and be real, And whenever so, I think that's what happened with COVID-19. And I mean, it's that particular virus is gone now. It's been mutated and it's changed to different variants. So that particular vaccine that was based on COVID-19. That virus RNA structure or whatever, that's no longer relevant. I mean, it's not going to protect you from the new variants. And in fact, since it's had so much time to mutate and advance, and it's had so many times to practice adjusting to this particular vaccine, it seems like that if it changes enough that the people that took that maybe, I mean, I'm just saying that's what they're saying, that it could endanger people later on, because I don't know why they require this absolute capitulation. Everyone in the world has to take this thing. I mean, I'm just totally suspicious of it.
I know. It's.
I guess you would be wise to take it early on because the thing has been on the shelf for a while. So if they finally get around to you like a year and a half later, it's like, wow, that thing is old,